Greetings, everyone. Your cartoonist pal Stan here with another episode of 50 Years in the Dungeon, the show I'm doing to celebrate the fact that this 2024 is the 50th anniversary of the game Dungeons and Dragons and the entire hobby of tabletop role playing game. So, yay! Woohoo! Thanks for coming. No, I'm doing this by talking to folks I know who worked on the game. I say folks I know because almost everyone is someone I know. I'll talk to anyone that worked on the game at some point during its career about how they got into it, what the game has meant to them, and we compare notes and tell funny stories. And while I'm doing that, I also do a cartoon homage to a classic piece of Dungeons and Dragons art. I'm taking one piece of art from each year, each of the 50 years of D&D. This year we are up to 2002, which we're over halfway. Over halfway. This show's been going long enough that we're in the, it's not really the home stretch, but we're in the second half. And so we're going to be doing 2002, a product called The Book of Challenges. But we'll get to that in a minute. I'm going to start by introducing my guest, who I've known for quite a while, worked with at Wizards of the Coast and other places, which we can talk about too, but I'm going to stop blathering here because I hate seeing myself on my screen alone, and I can bring in J.D. Wiker. J.D. Wiker. I have a wrong overlay up. I'm such a pro. Hey, J.D., thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Stan.
It's a pleasure to see you and have you here. Hey, for those who may not know, when stuck in an elevator with someone who says, "So what do you do? Who are you?" What do you say?
I generally say, please stop pressing the buttons. That doesn't help. I have been so many different things. What I am lately is I'm a producer for WizKids.
Mm-hmm.
I get to be involved in the process of making miniatures for tabletop games. But over the course of my career, I have done video game editing. I have done localization work. I've written marketing text. And way back in the long, long ago, I wrote RPG books with you.
Yes. At Wizards of the Coast and in a little joint we called the Game Mechanics.
Yes, indeed. And that formed 22 years ago.
It formed. Yeah, this month is the anniversary, because that's when we had our we got caught in the layoffs. That was our round of layoffs at Wizards.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that is. We're within a couple of weeks of exactly 22 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, Linnea. Hello, Carrie. Thank you both for dropping in and saying hi. Glad to see you. JD, how is it that you got into gaming? So usually, aficionados of the show will know. I like to start talking about background, just how you got into gaming, because you and I also, besides this having been synced up on the layoff things, we are just about the same age.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Right? So it's a pretty straight comparison to how old we were and what was going on. But how did you get into gaming in general, and then D&D in specific?
Okay. In general, my family was really big on family game nights for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I can still remember sitting around on Friday nights playing various games with my family, sometimes just playing chess with my sister while we were waiting for the syndicated episodes of Star Trek to come on. I sort of developed a interest in gaming as a result of all of that. So I played a lot of board games, tried a lot of different things. And then I think I was maybe 14 or 15 when I decided I wanted to try to make my own game with all of the various pieces that I had of these other board games
right.
that I wasn't all that keen on playing anymore. So I kind of cannibalized a bunch of different Milton Bradley and Parker House games or Parker Brothers games, sorry, and tried to build my own game. And I quickly discovered that the thing that was really stopping was not having like playing pieces. And back at that time, it wasn't something where you could go online because there was no
there was no
online.
online. Well, I was going to say, I mean, before that, there also wasn't European board games and board gaming. Like, so, what were some of the games that you guys were playing?
Well, as time went on, I was playing different things. Like I graduated from chess and checkers and Stratego and all of that stuff. And like there was I want to say it was a Milton Bradley game, like Chopper Command or something like that. But
Yeah.
it had like a board game mat, like a actual board, and then it had this clear plastic like stand, like a little table that you would put on top of it, and so your helicopters would be up here, and all your tanks and your individual units would be on the actual board. And that was one of those things where I was like, "This is really cool for a game that's not that interesting to play. I need to play something different." And so yeah, I started trying to like build my own game, and I discovered that hobby shops in my area, or at least nearby my area, carried metal miniatures, and that was a game changer. Literally, I walked into a store and I was kind of looking at these pieces, and I was like, oh, "This is great! Like I can make a game, and like this, I can get like 3 or 4 of these guys, and they'll be like my infantry, and like these guys will be like my gunners." And I picked up all that stuff and I took it to the counter, and the guy at the counter at this hobby shop was like, "Oh, you play D&D?" And I was like, "Huh?" And he said, "Dungeons and Dragons?" And I'm like, "Huh?" And so he walked me back, and because I had been so fixated on looking at the miniatures, I totally missed the old box, the basic box set. The one with
Right.
the red dragon on the front, and the very colorful one had "In Search of the Unknown" inside of it. But yeah, so he showed me that, and I was like, "Ooh, this is interesting." And then he started to tell me the story of the kid who got lost in the sewers.
Yeah.
And he was like, "Yeah, everybody's been talking about this." I'm like, "I'm like 14 years old, dude. I don't watch the news." Um, but I had gone there with the intent of like picking up miniatures, so I was like, "No, I blew my wad. I don't have any more money, right? But this is cool. I may come back." And I convinced my parents to go back the next week, and I had some more money, and I was like, "I would like one D&D, please." Um, and so yeah, I picked up that box set, and I was like, kind of casually learning the rules. And a friend of mine that I had like showed my homemade game,
Mm.
he saw that I had it, and he was like, "Oh, you play D&D?" And I'm like, "I not yet. No, I'm still reading the rules." And he's like, "Oh, okay." And he starts flipping through In Search of the Unknown. He's like, "You want to play?" I'm like, sure." And he's like, "Great, I'll run this for you. I've like played a lot of times. I know what I'm doing." He did not, in fact, know what he was doing. But he introduced me to a guy who did. And that guy introduced me to D&D in a more proper way. Yeah, I got hooked. And then, after that, it was any role-playing game I could get my hands on that kept my interest long enough, and D&D was the one that kept my interest the longest.
So that would have been like 78, 79.
Yep.
Right. Yep.
Yep. Yeah, I think I discovered it in like midwinter. And then that summer, the Player's Handbook and the DMG and Monster Manual for AD&D started showing up in my local Kmart. And it was the same thing. Like I went there one week, picked up the Player's Handbook, went there the next week, picked up the DMG, went the next week, and picked up the Monster Manual.
All right, so it's going to be a little later than that. So weird thing about doing this show is I have now gotten a much better idea of exactly what year things came out. That would have been 1980. The summer of 1980, all 3 would have been available.
So yeah, it was probably like 79 when I discovered the game, the basic game, and then
Makes sense. Yeah. Who were you playing with when you first started playing? Not names, but like what was Was it? Give me. Do you have names
Well,
and
let's see. There
addresses?
was Tim and Mike and
Was it?
Mark, Kip, Tim, of course, the guy who taught me, uh,
So just like
Andy,
your friends from around the neighborhood, or at
friends
school?
from high school,
Yeah.
friends from high school. Yeah, because I'd learned during my first year of high school, and in Indiana, on that side of the capital city of Indianapolis, uh, high school started at 10th grade.
Right.
So I was a little older than 14, I guess, maybe. I don't know. It's a long time ago.
It was. It's getting longer all the time.
Right? How does that happen?
I just wish it would stick still for a while. Um, so you you didn't get to be doing it professionally until a while later in your life. Were you still playing the whole time? I don't know. You were in your late 20s, 30s when you started doing it professionally, or
I was mid 30s.
mid 30s?
Yeah, so I had like bounced around a little bit with uh freelance groups, I guess you would say. I had like done a lot of stuff at conventions just for fun and
Hmm.
that kind of thing. Um, but I tried working with a company that like basically organized freelancers and contracts and that kind of thing, and that didn't really go anywhere. But then I discovered a totally different game system, Ars Magica,
Right.
which at that time was owned by White Wolf, um, and got into that. And that was kind of like where I was at for a long time, and that motivated me to uh, try to get a job with Wizards of the Coast after they acquired the rights to Ars
Mm-hmm.
Magica. Um, and I started off there actually in customer service, and that would have been 1994.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Drove out here from Indianapolis with Sean Carnes, luminary in the Magic the Gathering field, I guess. Um,
Luminary. Luminary, we can talk about. Magic the Gathering for sure.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, Sean and I drove out here. We got an apartment, and he started working at Wizards because he'd gotten a job in customer service, and then about I want to say 3-4 months later, I got a job there as well. I stayed there for a good long time, and then Wizards divested all of their RPGs,
Yeah.
and so I had written a couple of supplements for Ars Magica fourth edition, third edition, but yeah, I didn't have any more work. But then Atlas acquired them, and I was doing a little bit of freelance for Atlas. Um, and because my computer at home was really awful, I would just tend to like stick around in customer service until well after hours and just take advantage of that.
Right.
Um, and that happened to be that little part of Wizards of the Coast happened to be like on the path from a nearby conference room to the nearest restroom. And I still remember Julia Martin came walking by, and she had been like gaming after
Right.
hours in one of the conference rooms, the fishbowl, if you remember those things.
I do remember.
So she came walking by, and she went to the bathroom. She was like, "Hey, what are you doing here so late?" And I just, "Oh yeah, I'm doing a little work." And she came back a little while later, and she's like, "So what are you working on?" And I kind of told her, and she was like, "Oh wow, there's like job openings at the RPG team, right?" I'm like, "Didn't know that." Yeah, you should apply. I mean, if you're doing that, you should apply for like the company you actually work for. I'm like, that's not a bad idea. And it took me a couple tries, but yeah, I eventually got in, and yeah.
All right. So two things before I'm going to switch over and start working on some drawing. So I just need to set my thing for people who ask when, and they often do. I'm doing my drawing on an iPad Pro with an Apple Pencil and using the app Procreate, none of whom are sponsors. There are no sponsors for this show. Want to say that. So I'll switch over here. The other thing is, so when you were talking about it, how you got into it, you said that you went and got minis, and I happen to know that also has been a very big part of your hobby, life, and career. Yes.
Who told you?
Well, I've got, we do research. This is not one of the shows where we come on cold. So
Yeah, yeah. Your research team contacted me and asked me about it. Yeah, I'm playing dumb here.
so in the years before you got into being a professional, what um, what was it? Were you doing on your mini? Because I'll tell everyone else. JD is a hell of a good minis painter. Uh,
Thank you for
uh,
saying so.
ha, hmm?
I said thank you for saying so.
Well, it's true, but in my opinion, I mean, who the hell cares what I think? Uh, so tell me about your growth of your involvement in minis as a hobby into because now you're working at WizKids. It's now part of your profession too.
It's true. It's true. It's probably a big part of why I got hired there. Um, yeah. So, fun story from back in the early days. Um, People back at that time, they weren't really like, again, they weren't going online and sharing their tips for how to paint miniatures. Because no online. So everything that I learned was more or less self-taught. And I made a lot of mistakes early on, like the big one being, oh, I can just use these little bottles of Tester's enamel paint to paint these miniatures, right? And these Tester's paintbrushes that I have should, also get the miniature painted well. And I was just happy as a pig in slop, just messing around with the worst possible equipment to paint miniatures with.
Right.
Um, But having gotten into D&D, I started like gaming with some of my high school buddies who like had already been gaming, right? The guy who had taught me was part of a different group. And so I went and hung out with them at some point and I showed them my box of miniatures. And at that time, it was like this little jewelry case that my mom was going to throw away, right? So it had like a
Right.
little compartment where I could put each miniature separately. And it was like, so yeah, I got those out and I was like, yeah, I've got all these miniatures. And they, these guys were twins and they were looking at my miniatures and they were like, yeah, wow, you've got a lot. And they're all like fully painted. And I'm like, oh yeah. I got a couple more at home that I'm working on. And they were like, cool. Let's show you some of ours. And they like ran up to their room and came back and they had miniatures that were like professional level painting, and I was just sitting there going, I feel stupid. um, so I started trying to like find sources, things that would teach you how to paint better. But I also
But
was just like really
did they
voracious
not?
about
Did they not?
miniatures.
I thought this story was going to be so they started giving me tips and showing me. No.
No, no,
Oh.
no. I asked them what kind of paint that they used because, of course, like I said, Tester's enamel over here, and they were using oil paints. And I know that some people still do that, and it looks really, really good, which is why theirs looks so good. You can get really great blending techniques using oil paints that you can't get with the standard acrylic paint that, most miniature paints are made of. Um, but yeah, around that time, I think it was either Grenadier or probably Raul Partha, was releasing like sets of 20 miniatures that came with like a very crude game.
Yeah.
But I was seeing it as, hey, this is a box of miniatures and it's like $20, 15 even, And then I was just delighted to find that there was a painting guide inside.
Mm,
And so that really like made a difference in my painting career. And I started, I hit that first plateau of leveling up to, oh, this is how you're supposed to do this. And so I started buying, like the old polyester flow quill paints and, getting
right.
actual paintbrushes, all of that kind of thing. And then gradually, as time goes on, you start discovering, oh, there's also this other company that makes miniatures, this other company that makes paint. This is what my local craft store, my local hobby store carries. This is what my local game store carries. And eventually, painting all the Raul Parth and the Grenadier and all that stuff led to going to a lot of the game stores that I didn't know existed in my city until then.
Right.
And then uh, Citadel came along, and Citadel had, of course, you know, a lot of paints designed for use with their own line of minis, which were designed to support D&D, but then for whatever reason, they stopped doing D&D things and started doing their own deal, which was Warhammer. And I got into Warhammer. But I got into Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay as opposed to Warhammer Fantasy Battles. So I wasn't out there painting like armies of elves and orcs and things. I was out there like going, hey, I want to paint this one orc and this dwarf and that kind of thing. I ran the Warhammer Fantasy RPG for a while, and I kept painting miniatures. So I ran it like every week.
Right.
And I set myself a goal of having like all of the miniatures for that week's encounter painted. So I would literally come home from work, go down to my basement, set up at my painting table, and paint until it was time to go to bed every night. Did not have a social life at all. Like somebody would call and be like, hey, you want to go see a movie? And I would be like, can I finish 12 miniatures and still go to this movie?
Now that's dedication. That's how you become a professional.
That's how you become a man of 1,000 minis.
Yeah.
So yeah, and Games Workshop, all the other things that they have done over the years. One of the things that they really did that was helpful was they produced a magazine that had articles about how to paint miniatures. White Dwarf, you could pick up White Dwarf every month, and it had 2 or 3 articles on here's how we painted this miniature that we make.
Right.
And that leveled me up again, new plateau, and then I think that's where I was when I was at Wizards of the Coast, right? In customer service, there was a big Warhammer and Warhammer 40K contingent, and I was playing a lot of Warhammer 40,000, I started gaming with those guys, and I started I got actual access to the internet for once in my life, as opposed to just America Online, I got introduced to like professional painters who were out there posting their work on their websites. And again, another level up.
Right.
So yeah, my journey of painting miniatures has gone through all of the steps of, man, I think I'm really great. Oh, actually, no, I'm terrible. Here's how to get better. Cool, I'm doing really well now. Oh, actually, no, this looks like garbage.
Yeah, well, it sounds like a writer's journey to me.
Yeah, it's everybody that suffers with imposter syndrome goes through this. But yeah, like every place I go, I like show off my minis, and my friends will be like, wow, man, you're like the best miniature painter I know. And I'm like, cool, how many do you know? Because it feels like it's not a lot.
Well, I mean, when you and I have been on panels and talking with people about game design and also card play or board game style play, we often talk about the local, being the best in your pool doesn't mean you're the best nationally, right? The local thinking. I don't remember what the term that you often, I think I use it, but you coined it, and now I can't think of it, which really isn't helpful.
It was actually on a whiteboard next to the card R&D area at Wizards. What was that? It was a local, not champion, but like a local exemplar or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not quite it, and I can't summon the name to mind anymore. But yeah, it's like first season of Avatar,
right.
where they're traveling around, and Sokka is always telling everybody, "Hey, I'm the best warrior in my village."
Right. You're not in your village anymore, Sokka.
Yeah, you're in a different village, buddy. You are like the worst warrior in our village. But yeah, I mean, you show your miniatures around, you talk to people, you see what they're doing, and you realize there are things that I could still learn. And even now, I mean, 45 years after I painted my first miniature, I still am discovering techniques that people have been like using for a decade or more.
Right.
And I finally give myself an opportunity to try it out, and I discover I can do this. So yeah, I think it's important, you have to know that you are going to suck at the beginning of anything that you try to work on. Miniature painting, game designing, GMing, role-playing in general, gaming in general.
Right.
And eventually you're going to get better at it, which is why, you had my, I think you had my Instagram handle up there earlier. On my Instagram page, Somewhere in there, there's a lot of photos. There's a picture of a couple of really old orcs.
Instagram.com/JD Wiker, Jedi Wiker.
Jedi Wiker. JD Wiker is a completely different person on Instagram.
Jedi,
I discovered
Jedi
strangely. Anyway, but yeah, I've got the pictures. One of the earliest miniatures I painted, and it's again Tester's paints with Tester's
Right.
paintbrushes. It's awful. It is just awful. There's no detail at all. And then I discovered I had another one, and about 4 or 5 years ago, I painted that one, and
Right.
I've got pictures of those two side by side, and you can see, yeah, you're going to start off and you're going to look like the one on the left, but eventually, if you keep at it, you're going to look like the one on the right. I see Dale Donovan joined the chat. Hey,
Hey, Dale, thank you for coming in. Good to see you.
I think
And
that calls for a drink.
Cindy is probably on the couch with him. So hi, Cindy too.
Hi, Cindy too.
Cindy too. Who? Cindy.
Calls for a celebratory drink.
Yes. Well, I mean, you know what? But that's the kind of thing that uh, um, I certainly, what you were saying, I've said almost word for word in the last 2 weeks, trying to convince people that it's okay to start drawing, and the guarantee is that the first one, it's going to stink. Let it go. Don't worry about it.
Yep.
But
Yep.
your next one will be better, and in 6 months you'll go back and you'll go, "Wow, I used to be like that. Now I'm like this." I'll tell you,
Yeah.
as a, from my perspective, that still happens to me. Kind of like look, there's a thing, I should be doing that.
Yeah, it's a two-headed hydra. I mean, two things happen, or can happen, right? So you're gonna pick up some new hobby, and you're either going to go, man, I wasn't instantly perfect at this. I lost interest. And I think
Right.
there's an anecdote from Ray Bradbury, I want to say, um, about how he encountered something like that, where he was talking to somebody with more experience who said, you're never going to get any good at this if you give up because you're not perfect to begin with.
Right.
Um, but the other thing is that you may try something for the first time. You may try miniature painting. You might try game designing. You might try, art, sketching, whatever, and go, you know what? I'm not good at this, but I also know that it's not for me.
Right.
Just because you pick up those paintbrushes, just because you pick up that sketch pad, doesn't mean you have to keep it. If you try for 6 months and you just realize, you know what, I actually find this more frustrating than I find it rewarding, then yeah, find a new habit, find a new hobby.
Right. If you like it, keep going.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's why I've stuck with painting all these years. I mean, I've done a lot of different hobbies over the course of my lifetime, and this is the one I've stuck with longest. And it's kind of like this zen-like state for me. I'll just sit down and start painting, and sometimes I get frustrated, and I'm like, no, I can let that go. I can just focus on the part of this that I'm doing well, and then get that done, and then I'll come back to the other part later.
Right.
One of the things, as an example, there's a concept called non-metallic metal,
Mm-hmm.
where you approximate, like with the reference image you've got there, you can approximate the look of metal with paint that doesn't actually have any metal flakes in it.
Right.
Because normally, when you paint metal surfaces with paint, it has metal flakes in it to make it look like, metal. Um,
Yeah.
but as you can see, with your source art there, if you add like shadows and highlights and reflections and things like that to a given color, it will look like it's reflecting actual light. And that's something that I learned how to do in painting not too long ago,
Right.
just a few years. And there are times when I'm painting something with that style, and I realize I don't like the way this looks, and I start all over again. But the thing is, I finally, with some of those pieces, I would just stop and go, you know what, I'm done. Right? I can't worry about how this looks anymore. I'm not gonna
Right.
stress over this. And I take pictures of it and I post on Instagram or Facebook or Kara or whatever. And I'm like, actually, that looks really good. I was too close to that before.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So,
Yeah.
Then we get to the professional part. And so you're... Yeah, I know. Now is when the good stuff happens.
I think I'm going to need a stiffer drink for this. All right.
I don't blame you. I'm gonna
Take a sip of Mountain Dew.
Woo!
Official sponsors of not this show, but probably something else.
But Coke Zero, if also you want to talk, give me a call, Coca-Cola.
So anyway.
We before I interrupted you and made you go in the Wayback Machine here, we were at the point where we're talking about you were working in customer service, and you got some encouragement from Julia Martin, who was a guest on this show previously.
That's true.
And applied, and eventually wound up getting into RPG R&D at Wizards. What was that like?
My initial recollections of what I worked on when I first started there are kind of hazy. It was alternity stuff, actually.
Right.
So yeah, it was kind of weird because I know that there was talk of having me work on some second edition D&D stuff, but I'll be the first to say that my lore knowledge of Forgotten Realms and Greyhawk and Dark Sun, all that are a little vague. So yeah, the decision was made, let's have him work on Alternity for a while. And so I did that. And that was, good experience. Then once third edition came out, they started having us write, as many supplements as we possibly could to get in there. And while that was going on, we got licensed for Star Wars, and we were doing the Star Wars role-playing game. And that was fun story there. At the time, I was like on Mike Selinker's team, and we were kind of like a team in search of a project. We tried a lot of different things, and oh nope, we didn't get the license. Oh darn it, what do we do now?
I have a whole year on my resume. I was on that team too. I was a creative director, and then after the 3E, they didn't need that role for me, so I went on to Mike's team. There's a year on my resume which just says prototypes.
Yeah. So yeah, we were in a meeting there. We were talking about how Mike brought up that Bill was going to be looking for people to work on the Star Wars RPG. And I immediately was like, ooh, that's tempting. And then I realized, hang on a second. I watched the original 3 movies, and I've probably seen them like 30, 40 times each. This is before Phantom Menace had come out, obviously.
Right.
And I was like, yeah, and I read like the novelization and Splinter of the Mind's Eye back in the day, but I have not really gotten into Star Wars since then. And all I could really remember was the Star Wars comics,
right,
and the Big Green Rabbit. And I felt my enthusiasm like kind of curdle and die inside me. And so I was like, there's going to be other people at the company who are a lot more, suited to this. They're going to be a lot more interested in this. I'm not going to get this opportunity. So I let it go. Right. And then a week later, we're in the same weekly meeting. And at the end of it, Mike Selinker says, so Bill has not gotten anybody who, has stepped up to work on the Star Wars game. So if you've got any interest, and I said, are we done with this meeting? I'm going to go talk to Bill. And I hopped up and went in and talked to Bill and said, hey, Bill, I'm kind of like between projects. So it'd be great if you want to use me for Star Wars. I'm happy to work on that. And then I ended up being known for working on Star Wars. So I was working on Star Wars basically right up until the point that you and I got let go in 2002.
So what was it? What did it turn out to be like working on Star Wars? Now, say for people who don't know, one of the reasons why some people didn't want to work on Star Wars is that Bill had worked a lot on it for West End games and for writing some lore books for Lucasfilm. He wrote the Star Wars encyclopedia. I don't remember what the title, but it was basically the Star Wars encyclopedia. And
That sounds
he
familiar.
created the names of so many of the races. So Bill had a very strong investment, and a lot of there were some people on staff who were like, I don't want to do that. I know Bill's going to be looking over my shoulder the whole time, and I don't want that. Now that I don't know, I don't think that turned out to be quite as true as some people feared it. But you would have a better.
Yeah, maybe. I often heard it said, and I think you actually said this at the time, that Bill had enough of a reputation within the RPG team that people were kind of like afraid to go talk to him.
Yeah, yeah,
And I didn't get that. I was just like, oh, hey, this is just a coworker. Yeah, I
right.
technically got to report to him, but I can still go talk to him. And so I would just go into his office and say, like, hey, Bill, I wanted to talk to you about this thing. I got this idea for doing this with the Jedi Knights, blah, blah, blah. What do you think? And we would sit there and have a discussion, and he'd be like, okay, well, go ahead and write that. I'm like, all right, great. I'll show it to you later.
Yeah,
And yeah, it just blew my mind that other people were like, I don't know how to approach Bill.
well, yeah, Bill, and a lot of that, your take on it was 100% correct, right? But the Bill, who has also been a guest on here, it can be in person a little off-putting. He like I come from New York, but he grew up in the city, and I grew up in the suburbs. And he's got a very city face and manner. And some people, if you haven't dealt with that, some people feel like he's mad at me all the time. It's like, no, he's just Bill. That's just
He has resting Bill face.
yeah, yeah. And he's always, and I think it puzzles him why more people wouldn't come and talk to him. But the fact of the matter is that his style, no matter, because the thing I told you, I told lots of other people, but most of them didn't pay attention or didn't get past it the way you wisely did.
I don't know if it was wise. I wouldn't say, oh, I was being very brave or wise or whatever. I was just like, I didn't know to be afraid, I guess.
Right.
I'm gonna stick my hand in this lion's mouth, and that's what I was looking for. And he never like was short or terse with me, so I didn't see the problem. But what was it like working on Star Wars? There was that part of it, but there was also the fans.
Yeah.
And in general, I mean, don't get me wrong, this was like 1999, 2000. The fans were fans. They had strong opinions, but in general, they weren't like quite as entitled as they seem to have become in the past like 15 years or so. I had, a few arguments with people over rules where, people would say, that's not the correct interpretation. This number should be higher. This number should be lower. How come Yoda is not 27th level? Because we don't have epic level rules in Star Wars. Sorry. I ran into that a few times, and that was more off-putting than talking to Bill.
Right? Yes. Well, I agree. Our fans are sometimes more off-putting than Bill.
But, I mean...
And in case you're watching this later, Bill, I'm really saying, listen to what I'm saying. I'm saying good things about you. You're just...
We love you, Bill.
We do. We love you, Bill.
So yeah, I got to do a lot of fun stuff while I was a Star Wars designer. I got to go to the Skywalker Ranch. I got to like attend the premiere of the RPG at Hard Rock Cafe, and
right.
I went to a lot of conventions where I could tell other visiting guests, yes, these are the stats for your character.
This is you.
Yep.
I remember at some point, and I think this was probably after we were doing game mechanics. You were
at least the came before instead of after.
One of the Star Wars prequels came out, and we went to see it. And you were like, "Thank God I'm not writing for that anymore, because anything they did on screen, I had to make work for the."
Yeah. We wrote the original rules with the knowledge of the Jedi that we had from the Phantom Menace,
Right.
and the original trilogy, and then in the episode 2, Attack of the Clones, Jedi turned out to be a lot more super capable than we had ever dreamed. Um, but yeah, I think that actually came out while I was still working on the game actively, and so it was probably the third movie uh, where I was just like, nope, 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 nope. They stopped being people and they stopped being superhero, or they started being superheroes, and that's they don't superheroes and ordinary people like smugglers and pilots and stuff like that. They don't mix well, stats
Yeah.
wise.
Yeah. I don't know if you did any work on the Saga Marvel game we did,
A
but
little bit.
those kind of things came up in the same questions. Like, well, he's got to be able to do this. He's got to be able to do that. And how do you make how do
Yeah.
you make a rule for it that doesn't mean that allows them to do it, but doesn't make them overpowered? How do you
Yep.
compensate for both? They can do it, but they don't do it all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. The artistic license special ability.
Yeah.
That is the biggest challenge, right? I mean, you kind of have to separate the plot armor, from the actual abilities of the
Right.
characters, and people are always disappointed that you didn't stat that character so that they always can do whatever they feel like doing. But I think that's where playing games like the James Bond role playing game from, I think that was Victory Games. But
So,
yeah, I played that quite a bit. Before I moved out here to Seattle, and you quickly realize that there are some characters that are just going to be able to do everything, and other characters who are more like normal people. You have James Bond on one side and slow horses on the other.
um, so, how long were you working in house at Wizards on RPG?
Started
Or
in RPGs, yeah. Started in '98. I think it was late '98, and then, like you said, we're coming up on the anniversary of
yeah,
our layoff in 2002. So yeah, so roughly 4 years.
what? So, in that time, when you look back at it, what are the projects that you hope are most remembered?
I would say from the time that I worked at Wizards, uh, the Dark Side source book for Star Wars,
Mm-hmm.
and the Dark Matter Arms and Equipment Guide for the Dark Matter setting for Alternity. Rich Redmond and I worked on that one together. Rich Redmond,
Right.
another, as you know, game mechanic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, he and I worked on that together, and we did a lot of research on that one into real world gimmicks. It's fun, actually. I got interviewed a while back by somebody who was talking about that game setting, the campaign setting, and I look back through the Arms and Equipment Guide and realize, yeah, that stuff is so outdated now. It seems so cutting edge in 1999.
It seems so cool.
Yeah, not so much anymore.
Turns out the world moved forward.
Right?
They,
There's
they,
Julia Martin. Hi, Julia.
Hello, Julia. Oh, look how many people have been here. See, the problem I have is I put my head down to work on this, and I can talk to you, and I
Yeah.
remember to look up every once in a while. Oh, Ravenlore's here. I haven't said hi to Ravenlore. Thanks for dropping in, man. Um, so it's, I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase this question so I don't sound like an idiot. What 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 is it when you think about those products? What are the things that you think you captured that help them to rise above as one of the things you
Well,
did well?
well, I think I just like talked about it with the Dark Matter Arms and Equipment Guide. Um, but yeah, like I said, we did a lot of research. We very thoroughly, wrote the art orders, so that the things we were describing actually look like what they look like. Um, uh, there were also things like I don't know if anybody had done this before, and I was kind of disappointed to see that it didn't really like come along anymore. Um, but like the arms and equipment guide had a fairly extensive section on clothing.
Right.
Um, and I tried to write that so that uh, different qualities of clothing gave you different bonuses in different situations. So if you were wearing like, a suit, you would get bonuses on, social checks. Depending on the setting, if you were wearing like expensive jewelry,
Right.
same kind of thing. If you were wearing, better like outdoor gear, oh yeah, you get a bonus on these other things. And I'm kind of disappointed that I don't see that in more games. I play a lot of Starfield from Bethesda,
Right.
um, and they have something similar. So I'm glad that it's out there, right? I like seeing that kind of thing from time to time. But uh, the Dark Matter source book, the Dark Side source book. Why is everything that I like dark? Huh.
I don't know,
Um,
AD. Why is everything you like dark?
so the Dark Side source book, I got to really explore like a lot of different eras of Star Wars,
Hmm.
because so much of the Dark Side stuff comes from an event that happened like 1,000 years before the first movie.
Right.
Um, so it was kind of fun where I could write that up and nobody would be able to say, oh, but in the movie he does this. Well, there is no movie, buddy.
Yeah.
I think he should be an eighth level counselor. You have no idea.
Yeah. And so he is. In fact,
You can tell I've got a love hate relationship with RPG fans.
yeah, it's funny. I mean, there's so many versions of, this would be great if it weren't for our fans that I've heard people say. That, that I mean, we
Yeah.
all, it's, we try not to say that in public because people don't understand. What we really mean is the people who take it too far, right? Most of the fans are super appreciative, but
Yeah.
they usually are afraid to talk to you. The ones who have no
Right.
problems coming up to talk to you are the ones who are sure they know better.
Yeah, exactly. The ones with that confidence. Yeah, that Dunning Kruger effect going on in their heads. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah. The thing is, when you write RPGs, same thing with like teaching classes on art, teaching classes on painting miniatures. Um, you get those people who are coming to it for the first time and they still have that sense of wonder, right? It's a
Right.
discovery for them. They're learning a new skill, they're encountering a new genre. It's cool. They don't have quibbles because they're too busy going, wow, this is so immersive. I love this. And it's the people who have been there a while who are like, yeah, but they haven't put a new coat of paint on that back wall in a while. So, this place, I don't know. I'm going to give it a bad Yelp review.
I totally. You know what? I want to be able to ride a rhinoceros, and if I can't, then it's bad.
Yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah,
All right. So, you know what? I'll give you an option. Do you want to dive some more deeper into what uh, more wizard stuff, or do you want to talk about game mechanics, or do you want to talk some more about some of the stuff you've done uh, in in the last 15 years?
yeah. The stuff I've done in the last 15 years has been like this weird parade of odd jobs in the computer game industry. Um, uh, yeah, like I think you and I were living not too far away from each other in Southern California when I got a job in Virginia, Northern Virginia.
Right.
Uh, yeah, and I moved across the country, and then that didn't pan out, and I ended up coming back and moved back to Seattle. Yeah, I've bounced around through a lot of different computer game companies over the years. Um, some I really enjoyed working at, and some I found a lot more challenging than it needed to be.
Right.
But yeah,
I mean,
I
we
actually
also
have
worked at Upper Deck. I mean, you were in Southern California because we were working at Upper Deck.
working on Upper Deck. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
That was
that's its own
that.
story.
That's its own story. Yeah. That
uh,
was yeah, we'd started working on the game mechanics, and then that was kind of like limping along, and then you needed more money than the game mechanics could pay you, which was, I think, at the time zero, because we were all not paying
right.
ourselves, we were
Right.
investing in the company. Yeah. And so yeah, you moved down to Southern California, and I followed you a little while later. That's where I met Hiram.
Mm.
Yeah, and yeah, we worked on card game text, among other things, and then
Mostly,
we
yeah.
tried our hand at an RPG that never went anywhere.
It was that was a funny. I mean, that was a funny, funny looking back at it.
To this day, I still chuckle every time I think of that, because it was the code name, Chocolate Rain.
Yeah, no, that would have been a really interesting game. We worked for a while. For those of you, the rest of the world who's listening who don't know, we at Upper Deck there was an impetus to create a role playing game, and JD was our lead designer on that, and it went along pretty well until suddenly Upper Deck started laying people off, beginning with us.
Yeah. Yep. 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 That's that. I think that's given me like a lifelong trauma. You work on something and you're like, I'm really taking a chance here by like focusing on this one project, because if they cut this project, I'm out of a job. And then
Oh.
that kind of experience, as soon as that hits you, you're like, oh, great.
The problem wasn't the I mean, there was so much going on there, right? I try and keep this a very positive show. There's a lot of, it wasn't the project. It was uh, because other things we got cut because they wanted the money for other things, not because of
Yes.
anything that was going wrong with what we were doing or our project.
Right.
Right?
Right. Yeah.
Just like, you know what?
Once.
Doesn't matter how good it's going. I want that over here.
Yeah. 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 No, absolutely. I do not pretend to understand the inner workings of accountants,
Hmm.
corporate accountants at that. But yeah, I mean, you realize when you are handcuffed to one project that if you go down, the project goes down. But if the project goes down, so do you.
Right.
And that really makes you paranoid. Like there have been a few times when in the computer game industry where somebody was like, "Hey, yeah, we're going to have you work on this and this exclusively," and I was like, "Do I have to? Can I work on can I spread this out a little bit?
Can
Just
I
work on
still
other
work
stuff."
on other things? I
Yeah.
don't want you to forget how good I am.
How versatile, flexible is the word I'm looking for here.
Um, all right. Yeah. So I was gonna leave it to you to decide which path you want to talk about. If not, I'll just grab one and ask you.
Grab one, go. Let's talk about whatever.
um, so, yeah, doing a good job. I'm a professional, you see. I kill myself.
So let's talk
So
about
what
how
about
my mind went blank.
that's a good question. You let's talk about conventions because I know that that's come up in a couple of the conversations I've done recently, and you were just talking about interacting with fans, but designing materials for convention and demo use, and then going up and doing seminars. I know we've done a bunch of seminars. What
Julia,
how
you were
much of
correct.
what we learned? Now, here's a question I kind of struggle with myself. Since it's been so long since I've been inside the industry deep as a designer working on that, I sometimes wonder to what extent is what we talked about, what I still have to say, relevant? How does it play into the
Yeah.
modern era?
Yeah. Yeah, at this point it's telling apocryphal stories about, things that happened when we worked at this place or that place, and
Right,
like the specifics, like, oh yeah, we really struggled with whether to make that a +1 or a +2. That stuff nobody cares anymore, and
right.
I started to realize,
Thank
this is
goodness.
this. Yeah, yeah. I started to realize, when I was working, with the game mechanics, and I was still living in Seattle, and I was doing freelance for Wizards of the Coast, and I kept applying, for positions as they opened up back in the RPG team, and I just wasn't making the cut. And I started to realize, the longer I've been away from that environment, like outside the walls and no longer in the little bullpen areas that we had, the less relevant my knowledge of D&D was becoming. And when fourth edition came along,
Yeah,
I think I literally said, "That's it. I'm no longer relevant. I don't know this system anywhere near as well as any of the people who are currently working on it or the people who've been playtesting it." And I definitely said that when the Star Wars Saga game came out.
right.
Like I said, when I was at Wizards, I sort of became the Star Wars guy. Um, I was the Jedi Council. I
Right.
wrote those articles. All the rules, questions, and clarifications. And yeah, they came out with the Saga edition. I was like, I have nothing else to add. I can write a couple of supplements, but it's going to be, kind of a crude understanding of how the system works anymore. So
Yeah, here's the thing that I found. Um, so I've been back. I was back at Wizards twice as a contractor doing production. Doing I was
I
a
have a
yeah.
I have a pair of shoes and a pillow that commemorate that event. Yeah.
You weren't going to tell anyone. Uh, and I found the one thing that I think I disregarded for a while until I saw how much Wizards disregarded it. The people who are not at Wizards anymore, I will say. So don't name names, but I will say the people I'm talking about are not currently at Wizards. Who did not value the basic skill of game design, of knowing how to put together a role playing product, and how no matter what the rules are, you that makes you someone they should want to have. Um, because they brought in people who I worked with a bunch of people who were very, very good writers, but did not know game design, did not know game product design, let alone game mechanic design, and
Yeah.
and no one was teaching them.
Yeah. Yeah. I hate to say it, but I sort of fell into that category myself, I think, when I was at Wizards. And, even when I was working on Star Wars, I learned a lot,
Yeah,
but I didn't really have like a specific mentor. Like Stephen Shen was my original mentor, and he helped me out a lot. And then I sort of like glommed on to Andy Collins, and I felt like he had a more grounded understanding of how the numbers tied together.
right,
And that helped me tremendously. But yeah, I never really felt like there was a clear
right.
path to go from, I don't remember what the designations were, like designer. Was it designer 321 with one being at the top, or was it the way around? But I was in the middle. I was a designer two, and I didn't know. I wasn't really sure like what milestones do I have to pass to move up to the next level. And I find that what you're saying about there's not a concept, there's not a core concept of how to teach these skills, or uh, how to instill that knowledge. That extends also to the video game industry.
Yeah.
I encountered that so much. I was hired at, I want to say, two different places, with the idea that I would be a staff writer.
Hmm.
And in both of those cases, they also expected me to be a programmer.
Yeah.
Um, and this kind of came as a surprise to me, right? And in both cases, they thought, oh, you'll pick it up. And I realized, no, I won't. And I'm sure that that's part of the reason I no longer work at either of those two places, because it was a lot harder to pick up than they seem to think it was.
Right.
But the overall point is that a lot of video game companies, they're really good at designing gameplay, and they can make it really exciting, but they can't really provide the motivations for the characters, the person that you're playing, to actually do these, missions, to do the quests. And so they figure that it's easier to teach a writer how to program than it is to teach a programmer how to write.
Well, yeah. The problem I ran into, I did not work in house, but I've been up for several positions over the years, and talked to a
Mm-hmm.
number of people who have worked at different places. And although they'll hire you to be a writer, in the end, there's a programmer who thinks they can write, and if they are higher up
Yes.
the org chart than you, then it doesn't matter. What they want will go, no matter
Yeah.
how professional it actually is.
Yeah. I was lead writer on a project for a company that no longer exists. And I wrote thousands of lines of quest dialogue and thousands of lines of flavor text for various items that show up in the game.
Mm,
And then one day, towards the end of the development, just out of nowhere, they said, "Hey, we're going to have a big story meeting." And I'm like, "Okay, cool." And it turned out that when they said big, they meant roughly half the company. And it was a small company, but still, there were easily 20 people around that table. And they literally went through the story and rewrote it with me sitting there
yeah, yeah,
trying to take notes and, trying to like follow along. Like, hey, if you want to change that line of dialogue, yeah, we can cut it. We can make it shorter. We can like change it. And it was a disaster. Um, and I was pretty upset by that.
yeah.
I didn't realize that they were thinking all along, oh, when the time comes, we're just going to go ahead and write the quest dialogue. And I thought, what have I been doing here this whole time? I'm sorry I didn't learn how to program. I really am. However, this is what you hired me to do.
Right, and it's good.
Well, I hope so. You
Uh,
Yeah. Anyway.
all right, I'm going to. I'm going. We've gotten past the hour, and I try and be mindful of my guests and the audience's time here. So I'm gonna wrap up the drawing for now. I'm gonna finish this offline as I do when I do. Hey, if you are a subscriber to our free newsletter, 50 years in the dungeon.substack.com, you'll be the first people to get to see the finished version. And it will be a week or more before the public ever gets to see it. And then I'll probably hide it on Instagram or something. So, free newsletter, 50 years in the dungeon.substack.com. Please, go on, give it a try. Um, so, yeah, I'm going to set that aside now. That's a little more complicated than I expected, given where it started. But, Todd Lockwood, turns out, he does good art, and it's not easy to do an homage. I want it to look good.
It does look good. It does look good. I'm not putting you on here at all. It's yeah, I totally see it.
So yeah, so say I'll finish that, and it'll go up. Folks will see. So folks who aren't subscribers will see it eventually. Keep an eye out. But the last thing I like to talk about is the fact that we are here for the 50th anniversary, and kind of like you and I having similar histories. That means that we have been gaming for about 92 of the 50 years. Um,
yeah, combined to be
yes,
specific.
yes. Well,
Yeah.
that's how math works, right? Um, so, do you have any thoughts on this occasion about either where it's at or where we've been or where we're going? And it's a weird. It's just kind of a good time to stop and go, huh? Here's a thought I have.
Yeah. Yeah. 50 years is, I mean, it's stunning. I mean,
Yeah,
I started like I said earlier, when I first heard about D&D, it was followed immediately by, yeah, about the guy in the sewers, right? And I've had to deal with the whole stigma ever since, the 60 Minutes episode that made D&D, a curse on the names of so many evangelicals and that sort of thing.
yeah,
Like I wrote an article for my school newspaper when I was still in high school about D&D and the fact that there were so many people at high school who played, um, and it was controversial. It blew my mind. I had people coming to me from school, people I thought were my friends going, oh my God, don't tell me you play that satanic game.
yeah.
And I was just like, are you joking? Do you not understand? How do you see that? Where are you getting this from? And of course, they were getting it from media outlets who
Yeah.
just wanted to sell hyper stories. But yeah, it's stunning to me that it has gone from that thing that you didn't tell people you played
Mhm.
to now when there are not just one but like 4 or 5 really big public spectacle D&D games that are on YouTube, that are on Twitch, that are
Right.
online, that you can watch them once a week, whatever, and they are incredibly popular. And then through that, you start finding out things like, oh yeah, this famous person plays, and this famous person plays, and this famous person plays, and it's mind blowing to me. Those were the people that would always,
Yeah.
you always thought, oh yeah, those are going to be the ones that say, yeah, no, I'm not. I tried that once. That's not my thing. But I think it helps that early on there were so many people who were, like, hey, yeah, I'm in a theater group
Mm.
and they like to play, and so you get these theater group actors who go on to do like, big theater shows, and then from there move into movies or voice acting work. And it turns out that, hey, they're actually kind of entertaining when you put them all together and let them play D&D,
And they still want to play.
and they still keep playing
Yeah.
year after year, week after week. Yeah, it's just mind blowing. But yeah, I mean, as somebody, like I said, I'm working at WizKids. I'm a producer. I work on the miniatures for the games, and one of the things that we've got coming up, I work on the unpainted side, but the pre-painted side also has this where we're doing the classic collections, right? The
Mm.
classic monsters, the classic characters, and so forth. Um, and
But
I
just
think that
I should ask you for some stuff I want.
right. Come talk to me. Come talk to me. If I already have it, I'm happy to share. Um, within reason. There are things that I can't give away because they're like, oh yeah, this was a sample. You can't give that to anybody. But anyway, yeah, we're working on stuff where there's a lot of first edition style monsters and so forth. And it shocked me how popular that was. Because I always thought, oh yeah, fifth edition, or sorry, first edition, that was the stuff that I was playing when I was 14, and that was a long time ago. So how are these people into this? How do they even know about this? If you want to find a first edition monster manual these days, you're going to pay a pretty penny for that. But yeah, they're out there. They're nostalgic. They want that stuff. It's mind blowing to me.
Yeah.
Mind
No, I
blowing.
mean the crossover between people who used to play and want to reacquire and people who are passionate about it now who want to own a piece of the history. Like I want to have that. I want to have this. You know,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
it's crossed over. There's now a larger Venn diagram overlap with comic book collectors.
Uh-huh.
It's not huge, but it's larger than it used to be. A lot of people are like, I want Spider-Man number this. I want to have a copy of Village of Hamlet, the one with the orange cover.
Right.
So, here's a question I haven't actually posed with anyone else before. D&D has, to an extent, suffered the Kleenex problem, in that a lot of people will say they are playing D&D. It's become, to many people, a generic term for tabletop
role-playing games. Yeah.
Not within the hobby. I mean, I don't think anyone who's watching this right now, anyone who's commenting, feels that way. But, I remember when 3rd edition came out, they were getting ready to do 3rd edition. Ryan Dancy and the business team went to the PR team who did some market research on it, the marketing team. And they came back with some answers that, the number of people who claim they are playing D&D every week was huge. But when asked follow-up questions about it, that a good 30+% of them were not playing D&D, and some of them weren't even playing role-playing games anymore. It had become the generic term for a hobby game.
Right.
Do you think that this is something? Do you think that's something that that Hasbro has to worry about, or fuck Hasbro? Is that something that's going to continue? Do you think D&D will continue to be a generic term or the catch-all term for tabletop role playing?
Absolutely. It's so established now that if you say, hey, yeah, I spent some time playing Ars Magica, or I spent some time playing, even Pathfinder,
right?
You get blank stares. What is that? And then the next words out of your mouth are almost invariably, well, you've heard of D&D, right? It's a lot like that. Oh, okay, so you guys are playing D&D. No. Playing Pathfinder. Oh, okay, so is that like D&D? Yes, it is.
No. Yeah, it's a guitar. Whatever it is, it's a guitar. I do another show. I know you know this one. My Thursday night show of improv cartooning is called Random Encounters. It's based on random encounter tables, and so my pitch for it, because the term random encounter tables is strange to people, I always say in tabletop role playing games like D&D.
Like D&D. For example, Dungeons and Dragons.
You have random encounter tables all over the place. But if I say like D&D, then people go, oh, okay, I have a imperfect understanding of what that means.
Yeah. I have a mental image.
Yeah.
It's like Stranger Things, right?
Yes, exactly like Stranger Things.
Stranger Things was another case where that really boosted the popularity. I mean, it was really kind of fascinating from perspective of somebody who I wasn't working on miniatures, company at the time, but that came out and everybody wanted to get a Demogorgon, and you came to realize, oh yeah, nobody's made those for quite a while. And then WizKids had one, and it's more like 5th edition accurate than it was 1st edition accurate. So I had one of those old 1st edition ones way back when. No idea what happened to that.
The very last official D&D thing I have designed, I guess I won't say ever because who knows what the future holds, was I did the adventure. Hasbro did a D&D basic set with, it was Stranger Things branded, and I wrote the adventure that was in that. And it was so funny talking to the Hasbro people about what this game. They were just like, we want to do it, make it happen, and we start talking to them about what goes into it, and they're like, Why do you need that?
Right? Can't you just press a button and it makes that happen?
Can't we just print more of what you've already done and throw it in there, and that'll be good enough? Just put a Stranger Things cover on it? No.
Yeah. It's the further you get removed from the actual decision makers, the harder it is to explain it to them.
Right.
You know, I can remember having conversations with people on the, what do they call it, the steering committee at Wizards.
Probably.
Like they actually asked some people in customer service, "Hey, can you guys like sit down and like play a game of Warhammer and show us what that's about?" And this is when they were thinking, I think, about making chainmail.
Right.
You know, the chainmail that Wizards produced. And so they were just like, we can't really wrap our minds around why people want to paint miniatures, let alone like will pay money to do it. Can you guys talk us through this?
Strange days. I just yesterday I recorded a show. Those of you watching live now, coming up in a few weeks, I'll be talking to Peter Atkinson because I already have.
I've heard of that guy.
Yeah. The for those of you who don't know, the original creator of Wizards of the Coast, the owner and CEO. It was so funny. The farther Peter got away from having Peter in the C-suite, the more the people up there got replaced with people who like you're talking about. It's like, can you tell us why? Can you show us this thing? We don't understand why people would want to play this most popular game of its category.
Right? Now, do they have to roll dice, or can they just flip coins? Yeah, you know, it's a phenomenon of companies that have a lot of things on various burners, and a lot of them are way back on the back burner, but they start connecting dots.
Mm.
This is my experience anyway, right? So you'll say, hey, yeah, you know, we've got this great game design, and, you know, we can do this with it. And they'll go, that's fantastic. And they'll go, well, you know, we just acquired the rights to My Little Pony.
Yeah.
You know, is there any way to incorporate that in there so that we can get both audiences? And the first thought that goes through your head is, if you choose to do that, you are going to lose one or the other audience.
Right.
Which one do you want to appeal to? How do you figure? Have you done the market research? Do you know who likes to play this game? And do you know who likes My Little Pony? They're two completely different groups.
That makes me think of Pokemon Junior. Because, I mean, that's an example of how you can appeal to both. Well, you can do both things together, and you can sell a whole bunch of them. For those of you who don't know, Pokemon Junior was the best-selling role-playing game of all time, measured by sales in the first calendar year.
Yes. Absolutely.
But it was considered an absolute failure, and they never did anything else with it. And people remember it as a miserable experiment, never to be repeated.
I think it's buried in the desert now, right next to the old copies of the Atari ET game.
No, I mean, one of the reasons it sold so much was they just sold all their stock off. They remaindered it to Walmart before the front of the year was out, and Walmart couldn't keep it on the shelves. Everyone wanted it. Sold so well. All gone now. But yeah, I just the people, I don't know, success in business brings in management that separates you from the decisions that got you that success.
Yeah, that can happen.
Again, Peter is a unicorn of a kind in that he understood light gaming and business and made good business decisions. And I think he would admit, right, got lucky, but he knew what to do when he got lucky. And
you got to remember though that I'm sorry, finish your thought. I
no,
follow up there.
Got it. I was going to say something else. put a lily on it.
Fair enough. But the thing you got to remember is that Peter was not a businessman when he started Wizards of the Coast. He became a businessman afterward. He took profits that he got from Magic the Gathering, and he invested that in his own personal growth, and he was taking business classes while he was running Wizards of the Coast.
Right. But I would argue... Oh, no, finish. Now I don't want to interrupt you, please.
Well, no. I mean, it's just, you see the outcome of that. You know?
Right. But I would argue that that's because he kind of like we were talking about with learning things. Like, he was a good businessman at this level, and as he got better, he knew he had to learn more, and he did. But it all grew out of, at heart, pretty good businessman.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no substitute for good instincts.
Right. All right, JD, we're closing in on an hour and a half now, and I want to thank you for joining me. Before we go, I'm going to pull up your Instagram again. People want to find JD's, see some of the minis that he's painted, and keep in touch with the things he's doing. That's where to find him. Instagram.com/JediWiker.
Yeah, make sure you do Jedi. If you do JD, it's a completely different person.
Jedi, like the...
The fun story there is that I got that nickname when I was working on the Star Wars RPG and answering questions online, and they started calling me Jedi Wiker. And I thought, screw it, I'll just run with
it. I'm Stan.
I've heard of you!
Thank you very much. Is there anything else that you want to plug? Anything you're doing or product that's coming up or whatever?
Keep watching my miniatures on Instagram. You know, I mean, there's always the stuff that I'm working on for WizKids, and I'm like, yeah, and actually I can't tell you about that yet. But there is the... Can't tell you about that.
All right. Follow JD, and when he can tell you about it, Instagram's probably where he'll talk about it. All right.
Or at least post pictures of it.
All right, so hold on, JD, and you and I can make a proper farewell in a minute. I will close out. Thank you very much for joining me. It has been a lot of fun.
It has been.
All right, so, and say again to everyone else here, thank you to JD for joining me. It was a good conversation. As always, an hour and a half seems to go by so quickly that I have to figure out a way to wrap up when I'd really rather keep talking. But guess I'll just have to invite JD back someday. Thank you all for tuning in and watching. Again, 50 Years in the Dungeon.substack.com is the place to go if you want to follow what's going on here. You want to know who the upcoming guests are. We've already revealed that one of them is going to be Peter Atkinson. You want to see the art that I finish as soon as it's done. And you get, as a subscriber, even a free subscriber, you get access to merch, and you get a little price break on anything I do that's related to the show. So sign up for free. And once you're for free, I'll try and get you to pay something. But you can worry about that later. If that's really not what you're into, I also have an Instagram account where you can just go to see all the things I draw wind up there also. Instagram.com/Stanex. So go and look up there, and I'll twist your arm later. I will be back tomorrow night with an episode of Random Encounters like we were talking about during the show. And I'll be back next week with another interview and more cartoon homage. So I hope you can join me then. Until then, thank you very much. Take care.